77 conference. Maybe you could talk to one another about how the original ideas have either been realized, still need to be realized, or have been in some ways perverted or abandoned in your experience over that time. Or you can ask your own questions of one another, or
talk to each other.
Talk to each other.
Well, having been involved from 1977 to 1998, was a span of.
I'm sorry. Let me just say this is a better question, I think.
Okay.
What were your hopes in 1977? What were your hopes of what would happen if you could crystallize? If you could have had the world in 1977 and things, why did you go to the UN, and what did you hope would happen, and have those things happen or not? That I think, to me, that's a more crystallized question.
The reason we decided to go to Geneva and the UN, actually the UN decided on Geneva. We wanted to go before the UN to make a statement, just like we made a statement at Wounded Knee. It was to make a statement. We knew there was follow-up. There had to be follow-up. But our statement was that we are sovereign and we're free, and we want the world, we demand that the world recognize us as such, as a free people that have the right to our own self-determination, to put it simply. But that was the statement. And the secondary reason was to just put the world on notice that we're coming. And here we come, us indigenous people. And you're going to have to deal with us, and deal with us in a just and meaningful way.
I think we needed to set up an office, so it was set up across the street from the United Nations in New York City. We had no idea that it would be a conference in Geneva, Switzerland. And the only reason it was in Geneva, Switzerland was because it was the seat of the Human Rights Commission, is located in Geneva. So it was not something that we expected. First of all, the logistics were a major operation for us to get there. But to let the world know, the nations of the world, because we had been studying the different countries that were emerging, evolving, and that were becoming independent. For example, Ceylon became Sri Lanka, and then when we looked at those countries and they were people of color, that they were indigenous people, and that I didn't know the word indigenous at that time. I thought it was like indigent. So to me, my world was still Indian, and I wanted the world to know that I was a red Indian, that it was not we were not from India. And so it was a whole learning process of different cultures and different languages, and I felt that it was going to be a long struggle, because first of all, to get across the ocean to Switzerland, I just thought it was going to be very difficult. But the whole, and having been one of the coordinators for the conference, I speak more to the logistics of it. But the whole issue of looking at the transitions that other nations were making, Tanzania stands out in my mind because we met with people from Africa and they said, well, it took us 17 years to get NGO status for Tanzania. And Tanzania was one of the first African nations to gain their independence at that time. So looking at it, in retrospect, it was short of a miracle that we did achieve the NGO status in a 3-year period, so that we had to prepare quickly for a conference in Geneva to develop the position papers, and we had to work on credentials for the different Indian nations. We had to tell them to be specific about your positions on what you're taking there and what you're saying about your lands, because the first conference was specifically about Indian lands and how people, Indian people wanted to be free on their lands to move about freely. There were other nations who were Indians who were in prison for living on their land. So there was the case histories that had to be developed, and so these were like history lessons for me as I was getting there. But I knew my objective, and it was to the continuing freedom or independence of our people. So when you get there and you get into dialogue and discussion, I talked earlier about concessions that we had to make from my world, Lakota, and the hemisphere's world of Indian, and then going to indigenous, and having learned that there were native people in every country in the world like us that wanted their freedom, that had been put out of the, either put aside or nationalized into their systems, that they had no identity. So every step was a learning process for me, but in my heart and my spirit, I knew that my struggle was about the continuing independence for our people.
And so, in terms of your hopes, though, because this is what I wanted to ask you. Today, a lot of people think, oh, well, you went to Geneva, it was some kind of a European vacation. And so, yeah, sure, we all want to do that. It's a European vacation. Can you talk about some of the hardships that were involved in this part of the struggle? And I know you've talked about people risk their lives, people risk their freedom, and why people would do that and why you did that.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, you know, the threats of the dominant society put in our way, okay, we gotta go, we'll go. And that's it. In my experience, that was and is the movement. You're presented with what you need to do, so you do it. You know, we thought we could go there, naively. We thought we could go to the UN, and we could present our case here in New York City. All we had to do was approach them and that would happen.
You get the General Assembly.
Yeah, the General Assembly. And then we wanted a conference on us, just specifically us. And they kept pushing us down the organizational ladder until we had to go before this committee on racial discrimination. You know, like, it diminished our status as sovereign people. So that was the reason when we went to Geneva, we had to make sure we made that statement. That we're going to be free. And for what's happened since, it's what colonization is all about. If you've never been on the front lines of struggle, and you come after the success of that struggle, you don't have the same commitment, and you're more easily swindled, you're more easily led, you're more easily directed by the powers that be. Well, this is the way you have to do it. You get 5 minutes to explain why you exist and what you want from that existence. And they forced us into an apparatus where it's a system of bureaucracy. It's a very sophisticated system of bureaucracy where you can't express who you are. You know? You cannot put forth any kind of strategy, anything cohesive. So what the indigenous people of the world have to do, and I was disappointed in '96 when we were over there, and here the representative who lived in Canada for the people, the Naga, I believe it was, that have an armed struggle for their freedom, and this guy that represented them was a total sellout. I was disgusted with him and the way he approached that meeting that we were at in Geneva in '96. I'll just never forget him. I can still picture him in my mind. You know? I wanted to slap him, man. It was such an insult to his own people. You know, that would be like an Irishman, you know, living in Argentina representing the IRA in Northern Ireland. So I just cannot and will not accept what's happened to the indigenous people now at the UN. It's absolutely unforgivable. It's bureaucratic. It is accomplishing absolutely, in fact, it is going the other way. It's diminishing us every year of this existence. Every year of this kind of conference, it diminishes us even more. Well, now we've got them for 10 years, we've had these guys up here, you know. And that's, you know, what interest does anybody that's part and parcel of the UN. What country is even interested in the indigenous people with this ridiculous forum? You know? There's no way you can express yourself as an indigenous person. And then you end up with the super traitors to who you are. Tribal councils are coming here from the United States of America. Tribal councils. And they're making statements. And they're putting on the costumes to authenticate who they are. I think it's embarrassing, and I'm embarrassed to be here. This is an insult to everyone that went to Geneva in '77.
What would you say to folks who say the emergence of a leader like Evo Morales, or the initiative to protect the rights of Mother Earth, are direct outgrowth of this movement?
Listen, I'm glad you asked that question. Because while I was in AIM, I went around the hemisphere looking for that spark where Indian people wanted independence. I went to the Northwest Territory. I went to Nicaragua. I went to South America. I went to Mexico. Went all over Indian country in the United States. And I couldn't find that spark. I thought, sure, Nicaragua. I listened to the people. They wanted independence. I go up north to Canada. They're so Christianized, they don't even know what I'm talking about. So, all of a sudden I realized that the spark that led us to our liberation as indigenous people was Wounded Knee in 1973. That was a worldwide event. And it was just a spark. And it lit a fire. It lit a fire that led us to Geneva in 1977. And as my experience in all of this took place, I look back at my life. That spark at Wounded Knee caused us to think internationally, because now the world knew and knows about ourselves. So there was 1974, then 1977. And when we got to Geneva and we met these Central and South American Indian people who were under threat of going to prison or being assassinated when they returned home by their governments for attending this meeting, and then to see them 19 years later, much more sophisticated than we were, much more advanced in their struggle than we were, or we are. I look back at Bolivia. It was a dictatorship in 1977. And the spark of the Indian resistance flowed from '73 down into Central and South America and allowed Indian people to organize. And in between time, as it flowed south, we got Rigoberta Menchú, Nobel Peace Prize winner. That's a result of that spark at Wounded Knee as it went south. And then we're into Avo. Because of that spark at Wounded Knee, we have a country run by Indians that has an Indian president. However, one more thing has to happen, because part of Evo Morales' people are in other countries. They haven't reclaimed all of their land. We can't make the same mistake the Africans made and accept the imaginary boundaries of the white man, the colonizer, the invader. Excuse me.
The Zapatistas.
And it's still the European structure that has taken over Bolivia. It's Indian people that have self-determined in the European structure. We still have yet to self-determine in our own traditional way of life. And to me, that's what 1974 was all about. Is that the the Declaration of Continuing Independence means we will return to our matriarchal way of life, and that all of life is centered around the family. That's it. That's it. And how you maintain civil and human and worldly and universal relationships within the family is then put to the extended family, then the clan, then your nation, and then the world. And that's why we, Indian people, never had war. So that spark that I was looking for, I got to be a part of. And that's the spark, if our grandmother of the earth allows us. But if it's only the Kogi that remain, that's fine with me. But I do believe that the fire has been lit by that spark. And that irrespective of what these lost people are doing, wasting our time and their own time at this permanent forum, is it's going to change, because it's not part of that fire. It's not. It doesn't come from that spark. The Declaration of Continuing Independence has to be the dominant factor for any American Indian participation. And to have allowed this forum to be taken over by tribal governments is such an insult to our ancestors and to you and me. That's all I'm saying.
Well, it's been 37 years that the work has been ongoing, and it's created a permanent seat for Indigenous people, which is another tier of bureaucracy. And I mentioned earlier that there were working groups in the early part. I participated for 21 years, and I didn't anticipate that it would be as long a time to have dialogue and debate over the years. I didn't know that would take a lifetime to to address the issues. And so it's a change of course. I was really interested in the treaty studies. So what I did was I took a lot of documentation, a lot of paperwork, a lot of the actual treaties that contributed to the treaty study by Senor Alfonso Martinez from Cuba. And that was my main work and issue that drove me to travel over the years to Geneva, because that was the basis of our struggle and our freedom, and it was really endorsed. Our status was endorsed by that treaty study, in spite of Senor Martinez being prohibited from coming to the United States. We did it by satellite, and we all, the people, Lakotas, and all the people in the hemisphere who had treaties from Chile and Canada, and it really defined the principles that establish treaty rights and support our continuing rights on the treaty. So that was my main concern, and was very involved in it over the years. But when you have, you don't have the participation of the parties. For example, Cuba was not a partner with the United States, so the big bureaucracy prevails and the politics. So it was disappointing, and I guess I just wasn't prepared for the lifetime that it would take to address some of the issues for particularly Lakota country and the Western Hemisphere. So many of our people are gone. Many of the witnesses, the traditional people who endured all of the struggle in the early years are no longer here, and so I'm disappointed about the big bureaucracy, the lifetime challenge that it became or has become, and it will be 40 years in 2014 that we've been involved, and that's more than a lifetime. So I'm disappointed in the permanent seat having become a permanent body within the UN structure, but also another layer of bureaucracy, because I always felt the vim, the vigor, the fire, and the spirit in some of those working groups to maintain our position on treaty rights. But with that new permanent seat, and I know they're on their 10th anniversary, that I was just really disappointed with the rules and procedures and the bureaucracy that have to govern the 1 5-minute position paper you're going to submit to them. So, and it's disappointing because I like I said, I didn't envision a lifetime of dialogue and debate to address our issue.
Well, if you went to Geneva in '77 with some hopes and aspirations, what are your hopes and aspirations today? What prospects for the future do you see?
Well, I listened to my grandmother there, and what she says to me is that she's tired of the human race. Now, in our creation stories, this has happened to us before as human beings, where we failed our grandmother the earth and our relatives. And so there was a cleansing of the earth. Curious enough, other religions also believe in some of these cleansings. Nevertheless, the human being has failed their responsibility again. And I do believe that there's another cleansing. And this time maybe the human being won't be included in the future. Because I was taught that we are cursed with the power of reason. And that's why we built our worlds according to what all our relatives and our mother, our grandmother could teach us, our ancestors. And for millenniums we lived according to what we could learn from all our relatives. One of the key things, one of the key teachings of indigenous people is anywhere you go in the world to this very day, is we don't overpopulate. We don't overpopulate our area. And if we find out that indigenous people have done so, that means they're no longer indigenous. So, if you don't know your creation story and you don't know the teachings from that, then you're not paying attention to your future. And I do believe, the Indian has always been, and that's how we built our entire world and our world view. And I'm speaking about indigenous people also, is that family comes first. And that's how you build your relationships with all of life, is how you get along in the best way possible in your family life. Where you're always polite, you're always considerate, and you have no intention whatsoever to insult anyone or hurt anyone's feelings. And it's a gross misdemeanor if you stumble into doing that. And there are ways we put that we corrected that in our own societies. All I'm saying though, really, is that the struggle is worth the effort, because we belong to a beautiful people with a beautiful past and a beautiful worldview. And that worldview has to keep coming around. But if you take a look at the present world today, they're coming around, they're finally realizing that they've overpopulated the earth, they're finally realizing that they've raped our grandmother to the point of their own extinction. And yet, do they turn to the indigenous people for advice, for direction? No, they put us in a permanent forum. And that's the sadness here. We've allowed those that are responsible for this permanent forum actually have allowed us to insult ourselves and our ancestors and everything we're all about. Insult our sovereignty, insult our freedoms, insult our way of life. find it abhorrent that I even went over to the UN and sat around not knowing where I was at. At any rate, that's what I see, is that struggle means completing a circle. You have to complete that circle in your life, in everything. And if you don't attempt to complete that circle, then your life as an indigenous person has ended. You know, physically, I'm finding out from this high of old age. There's a reason, very strong reason why we're matriarchal. Because men exist from diaper to diaper. And that's the truth. And that's why indigenous people, the men, always married younger women, so that those younger women could take care of them in their old age. You think I'm kidding? No, I'm not, man. But it's like, I told my sons, you know, you gotta have both of your feet on the ground and your path in life defined before you start having children and getting married. Don't make the same mistakes I did. So, this goes beyond politics. It goes back to that AIM axiom. Go home and learn who you are. And then you won't need I remember asking those old people to get out on the front lines with us. I actually did, you know, back in the late 70s, early 80s. We need you, we need you, we need you. And they would just smile very patiently. And that's all. Yeah. And now I understand why they smile. But as indigenous people, as a free-thinking people, we do not need this permanent form. What we need is individual delegations to come here and visiting these missions, visiting embassies, visiting other indigenous people, but certainly not in this invader-controlled patriarchal world. It's just, it is a form of lunacy. And to participate in lunacy means you're crazy. What a waste of time and money.
Well, I think the dialogue and the debate has gone on too long, and we have to look at other avenues within the UN structure to seek observer status, to seek a charter. What other options do we have? We have to look at that, as well as inside our own homelands, what we define for ourselves. And I really believe that the permanent seat was designed for a specific purpose for us. And we already have the Congress of the United States to cry to, and so we don't need fora to cry to. We need some action, and I think that we need to do that ourselves. We need to be self-determined and to always declare that what we're going to do, and that we oppose any actions that we don't want in our homelands. So I think we need to have some think tanks in Indian country with our young people to provide this history, and I want to thank you for documenting this, because I think it's critical to our own people in our homelands to know this bit of history, even though for me it's a lifetime, it's a very small time in history, but it made a difference. It was a call to the world, and it was defined, and we didn't have robots to keep it going the way that we wanted it to go, but we need to redefine our role while we're still alive, and we knew the original instructions, the original objectives of the Declaration. So we need to move forward on some options that we need to divert from the original superhighway that we were on for 37 years. Thank you.
Good. Thanks.
Can you see those yellow lights? Well, I can see them in their eyes. Can you see those yellow lights? Shining brightly day and night.